If you buy a washing machine and it catches fire and burns down your house, the manufacturer is responsible. If you get an electric shock, the same thing. However, if your smart washing machine leaks your Wi-Fi password to anybody who asks for it, and as an end result, you wake up in the morning and every laptop in your home is encrypted with ransomware, the washing machine manufacturer is not responsible. Funnily enough, they're not. And consumers might have a hard time understanding why not. And this might be what we will see regulated one day in the future.
This is very exciting. Hi, this is Dale Peterson, and welcome to the Unsolicited Response Show. This week's episode, I have a recording of an interview with Mikko Hypponen. He wrote, "If It's Smart, It's Vulnerable," and we'll talk about his new book and some of his thoughts on key areas related to ICS and OT cybersecurity. I have to apologize. Very few episodes of the Unsolicited Response Show this summer. We did well in June, but July, I think we had one episode. But we're back on schedule now. So you should be getting an episode every week in your YouTube or podcast feed, whichever you prefer. As always, I'm looking for suggested guests and other topics and people you'd like to hear from or topics you'd like to hear about. You can send me any suggestions or questions to s4@digitalbond.com. You can even record a question if you want. If you go to dale-peterson.com, on the right side, there's a record your question thing. You can record that. We can even include your question on the show if you like, or if you don't, we'll just take the input. The other thing I wanted to mention is that the S423 call for presentations is out, and it's open until the end of August 31st. We have 3 days on 3 stages to fill, so we need a lot of great content. I'm counting on you out there. We're looking for content that helps create the future mission of S4. Now, in the past, we had stage 1, stage 2, and then sometimes we called stage 3 the sponsor stage. Last year, it was the partner stage. This year, there are no sponsor talks, no partner talks. It's all fresh, unpaid for content on stage, on 3 stages. So I'm really counting on the community here to fill up those stages with great content about things that are new and important to the future of OT and ICS security. You can go to s4xevents.com/CFP. Or if you have an idea, just email it to s4@digitalbond.com. Don't overthink it. Just send in maybe 2 to 4 paragraphs on what you want to talk about. We'll have a back and forth and see if it's an S4 talk and put it up on one of the stages if it is. With that, let's go to this episode's interview. Joining me on the Unsolicited Response Show this week is Mikko Hypponen. He is, of course, a legend in the industry from his speaking and writing. Most of you know him from his long career at F-Secure. But as I understand it, there's been a recent demerger where F-Secure still exists servicing the consumer end, and now with Secure handles the business side of F-Secure, and you're the chief research officer there and still play some role in F-Secure. I thought it was funny in the announcement, one of the things they said was, "Who gets Mikko?" And the answer was both companies. But the reason why I wanted to have you on the show was about a book you wrote recently, "If It's Smart, It's Vulnerable," which I saw was #1 on Amazon in the network security category. So with that long introduction, Mikko, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much, Dale. Thanks for having me. It's been a while.
It has been a while. We got to drag you into the ICS world from time to time. I think I want to start. I have an idea in my own mind, but as an author, one of the questions I always like to ask was, who did you write this book for? Who was your intended reader as you were writing this?
Right. Yeah, well, it completely changed from the book I started to write to the book I actually finished. Because originally, I mean, this has been a very long time coming. Originally, I started writing a book for my colleagues, for other security professionals. The original idea for the book was cyber war, and like how do nation states operate, what have we seen, how do they technically do what they do. Slowly it evolved into a book about APTs, and frankly it wasn't really going anywhere until the pandemic hit. And then I really had no excuses not to finish the project, and I started writing it like really professionally. And I hired an editor. She was really good. She helped me proofread the book, and together with her we decided that it's going to be a book that anybody could read. So this is not a technical book. It's a book about the massive change in the landscape that's happening around us. Why did we end up where we are right now? How does the technology revolution change our world, and where we will be going in the future?
I thought when I was reading the book, I thought this is a book that I could give to any of my family or friends who wondered what the heck it is I did. If it's smart, it's vulnerable. Published by Wiley there. That's a nice
Mhm.
publisher too.
Oh yeah, I'm
Um,
really happy to have them. Yeah.
but I really thought, like, for example, my mom and dad, who are now both in their 80s, could read this and understand it. And it really seemed to cover the past, present, and future of this broad field of cybersecurity. And what I really liked about it was how you intermingled entertaining stories
Hmm.
in with the information, so that it wasn't just a dry book that someone would struggle. That there's many of these informative books, but maybe hard for someone who doesn't really care that much about cybersecurity to get through.
Well, I have to confess to you, I stole that structure idea from one of my favorite authors. Unfortunately, he only writes in my language, which is Finnish. A guy called Jari Parantainen. He's an expert in productizing things. And he writes books like these, books which contain first a segment of facts and then stories.
Hmm.
Facts, anecdotes, which makes it really nice to read. And I love his books, and I wanted to copy that idea. And that's why my book is filled with stories. And I certainly have a lot of stories to tell after 31 years working in the industry.
And I can't remember your exact words, but when you were describing yourself, you said your career was investigating cyber crime or something like that. You had a
Right.
little tagline for what you do. What was that exactly? Do you remember?
Often I introduce myself as someone who hunts hackers, the evil criminal hackers, to be specific. But as you mentioned, the split between F-Secure and WithSecure, technically this is still the same company I joined in 1991. The company has renamed itself a couple of times and split into different parts. But if we look at the company registration, technically it is the same company. And having worked with the same company for 31 years, I guess it's a bit unusual, but it does give me a unique window which really shows how much the world changed, not just how much information security and cybersecurity changed, but how much the enemy changed. It used to be
Mhm.
so different back then in the early 1990s.
So I mentioned that it's an ideal book for the security professionals, friends and family trying to understand it. And I actually, just one more thing on that. I thought that what you did on the past was especially impressive,
Mm.
because over, I can't remember if it was the main 2 or 3 sections, but to cover many decades concisely and in an entertaining way was really impressive. And I think some of the stories there, I had heard the one where you hunted down the original writers of the malware. I had heard
Hmm.
that story before, but a number of them I hadn't heard before. So I think that the security professionals, even if they think they know most of the information, will find it a very interesting book from that standpoint.
Hmm.
Uh,
I'm very happy that I have very thorough archives, and I have basically all of my emails since 1994, which makes it really handy to fact check things or go back to history and try to remember what happened with a specific case. So I'm really happy I've been saving my old emails and other documents.
Yeah, there was an amazing amount of specificity to those stories, and like you say, these archive elements where you actually could pull out an email and say, "This is what they wrote to me. This is what I wrote." With all that said, there was a number of things in that book that I think, this audience is primarily ICS security professionals, that you would mention something and talk about it for a page or two, but I really kind of wanted to dive in and get some more of your thoughts on that.
Hmm.
The first one that really caught my interest was on pages 80 and 81. You started talking about security training, and you said it, quote, training nearly always fails. And then a little later, the right answer may be to remove responsibility from the users.
Hmm.
Now for the security professional, I don't think you'd get a lot of argument about the failure rate of security training.
Hmm.
But what can we reasonably expect, let's say, in the corporate world, from the corporate user, from a security standpoint? Is there anything we can expect them to, not perfectly, but very reliably do right?
Okay, explain this to me. Why do we give every employee, every sales guy, every front desk employee a full-blown computer which can be used to develop programs, write code, execute binaries, and then share those binaries with anyone else and they can do the same? That's what most companies do today as they pass out Windows and MacBook laptops. What I mean by taking away the responsibility is that we really shouldn't be giving like tools which can be used by end users to shoot themselves in the foot unless we really know they need them for a particular purpose. And this is one of the reasons I'm a big fan of removing functionality from the users who don't need the functionality for their daily work. So when you think about users who could do everything they need to do with an iPad instead of having a full-blown computer, why don't we give them iPads? It's much harder for them to shoot themselves in the foot with an iPad because you can't. Exploiting that costs $100,000. Exploiting a Windows laptop costs you $5. So that's one way of thinking about it. And overall, in the bigger picture, we can't really try to put responsibility on these technical complex topics on everybody, because today everybody needs to use technology, and we really should be trying to remove the responsibility and put the responsibility to where it belongs, and it belongs to operating system manufacturers, to internet operators, and to security companies.
Yeah. As you say that, I was going to think about, we kind of step up. So you have just the generic user on the corporate network, maybe in accounting or sales or any, quality assurance, anything like that. And then you move up. And then in the ICS world, for example, we have operators.
Mhm.
And I would say operators would be similar to a generic user. They have specific tasks. And we actually do a pretty good job when when done right, of restricting what operators can do
Mhm.
on the computer. The computer is fairly well locked down. They even have role-based access control, so they can do some things, but they can't, for example, reprogram displays
Mhm.
if it's done right. Engineers now have more capabilities, and then security professionals even have more. At what line do you draw that idea that we shouldn't be requiring something of them? Is it between the operator and the engineer, or the engineer and the security professional?
Well, it's kind of hard to really draw the line. Most organizations, I guess, will be able to draw the line organically, like give the minimum to users. And if it's not enough, then you have to upgrade them to more functionality. So, for example, the organization like ours, which is full of developers, people who write code, of course, they need real computers. But most users in most offices don't. And I think the time where everybody has a full-blown computer is behind us. And actually, it has already happened a couple of years ago. The most common computer on the planet today is an Android smartphone or
Mm.
something like that. And those clearly are computers. In fact, if you look at the computing power of a new iPhone, that would have been Cray 2 in 1990s. And Cray 2s required a separate power plant basically, and nowadays we run them on batteries and we have them in our pockets. So this really is a very quick revolution, the quickest revolution we've seen in mankind's history.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I was with NSA in the 80s, just out of college. And I remember having, it was such a big deal to have access to 2 Crays. I was like,
Right.
that was the most thing. And now, like you say, my iPhone has a lot more than that. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Oh, um, and I'm very sympathetic to what you say, because I have seen this where we keep saying the users need to be more, the users need to be smarter, the users need to do these things. And And in the ICS world, I keep thinking we need to remove the burden of security from these users. So
Yeah.
I'm with you on that. But where would that fall in terms of security awareness training? Would you still say we need to have these people looking out for security things? Do they still need
Mm.
to be part of the detection process? Or do we just say, we're just going to stop all this security awareness?
Well, in the ideal world, we wouldn't need to train users at all, and they couldn't do mistakes. The systems we would give to them wouldn't allow them to make mistakes. Right now, the most typical training users get is that we try to train them not to click on the wrong links, and that's
Mhm.
just like, if there's a link that you must not click on the screen, that link shouldn't be on the screen to begin with. So we are already failing if we try to train users at that level.
Mm.
Now, we can't get rid of all training, since many of the threats we see are not technical at all, but more around social engineering, trying to trick users to use the systems wrong. Um, that's something we have to train to users, and that actually is much easier to train. Technical security is hard to train. People are not that um, they don't understand it nearly as easily as that someone's trying to fool you. If someone does this to you, then you know that this is a scam, and people are pretty good in detecting scams once they are aware of them. And most, for example, social engineering scams or BEC scams, they use the same structure over and over again. And if users just are told, this is how they work, this is how they would try to trick you, they will detect that. And that
Mm.
kind of training we will need, and we won't be able to get rid of that. I think somewhere in the book I say that when we track down the root cause of every single data breach, every single data leak, every malware outbreak, there's always one of the two root causes: a technical problem or a human problem. And technical problems are hard and expensive and slow to fix, but they are fixable. Human problems are hard because we can't patch human brain.
Mm. Well, let's shift then, and this is much more tied to the title of the book. If it's smart, it's vulnerable. Uh, IoT, and you didn't mention it in the book, but I'll throw in IIoT. And I guess if we
Mhm.
just need to, for the purposes of this conversation, if we think of IoT as something consumer based and IIoT more process business based.
Mhm.
Um, on page 133, you write, in the IoT era, manufacturers will be chiefly responsible for securing devices. This is a difficult equation as price is the key selling point in domestic appliances. And I'd agree with you on that. I don't think you'd get much disagreement in terms of the difficulty of it. Um, do we have any chance of success on that? I mean, to me, that's a little bit daunting that if we agree with what you said there, how are we
Mhm.
going to get over this problem?
Yep, it is tough, because it resembles a market failure in many ways. I mean, the idea that the better products will lose in the marketplace because the way they are better is invisible to end users. End users they don't ask questions about what kind of security features are in home appliances, and the ones with the better security features are more expensive because security costs money, which means the products, the home appliances with the worst security, are cheapest, and they will outsell the more secure devices. And market failures, typically we try to fix as a society by regulation. So sure, we could try to regulate this. Let's regulate IoT security, um, and that's hard. I mean, I'm not a big fan of regulation, to begin with, but here it's especially easy to go wrong and try to regulate how these devices should be secured. Which would then require the regulators to be security experts and keep up to date with all the latest
Mm-hmm.
technologies. Um, if we're going to go the regulation route, and I think it's going to happen at least in some markets, um, I think the best way to do it would simply make the manufacturers responsible for the damages created by the security vulnerabilities of the devices. And this isn't that far-fetched if you compare to existing regulation on other kinds of security and safety, like fire safety or electrical safety. If you buy a washing machine and it catches fire and burns down your house, the manufacturer is responsible. If you get an electric shock, the same thing. However, if your smart washing machine leaks your Wi-Fi password to anybody who asks for it, and as an end result, you wake up in the morning and every laptop in your home is encrypted with ransomware, the washing machine manufacturer is not responsible. Funnily enough, they're not. And consumers might have a hard time understanding why not. And this might be what we will see regulated one day in the future.
It's funny you mentioned that because I had written that example down. I thought that was a really good example. And I guess my extrapolation was if the washing machine somehow infected machines on my network or was listening on my network and got my banking credentials and I lost $50,000. Do you think there's a case where regulation could be put in place that would say the manufacturer would be liable for that if it was due to a security weakness? I mean, that in theory, I can get that. It seems a bit of a stretch to me, though, that such a thing could be
No, I don't think it's a
accomplished.
stretch. That's exactly what I'm speaking about. The manufacturers should be made liable for the damages created by security shortcomings of their devices. If a smart washing machine is a way in for a hacker, and as an end result they steal money from you, then the manufacturer should be responsible for that. So what's the point of all of this? Well, the point is the manufacturers wouldn't want to be responsible for damages like these, which means they would do the investment to get the security needed not to have this happen. So instead of regulating how these devices should be secured, we simply put an initiative which makes the vendors secure their devices, and they know best themselves their own architecture, their own shortcomings. They know where they should be investing money to make them more secure. That's why I'm not a fan of regulation or certifications which are very specific on how to secure the devices. Just change the game so that the vendors themselves want to secure their own devices. The other way of doing this is voluntary certifications, and as you know, that's already happening in some markets. We are seeing governments issue certifications for devices voluntarily to make customers or consumers think more about security when they're buying smart devices and they see that some of the devices are certified to be secure by the government or by local cert or what have you. That might be enough to make the consumers think about security and ask for better security features. And of course, that's another way of trying to reach the same outcome.
We have every legal system is different. In the United States, to recover things, you have to show damages, which is what you're talking about there. But we also have issues of could this have been expected? Could this have been prevented? And that's where you would start to get into this, almost set of standard of due care, saying these are a set of security controls you need to be put in place. Insurance companies are dealing with this now. They're saying, if you don't do these things, you're not covered. So I don't know, even if we took your approach, I'm a little bit, I guess, not certain whether you still wouldn't end up with this set of these are the good practice things that you have to do. If you do those, then you're covered. If you don't do those, you're not covered, at least in the US system, because you can't expect every single issue to be addressed. And many lawsuits have been lost by things that were unforeseen. The company could not have known that, so you can't hold them liable.
Right.
Is it different over in Europe? What is it over in Europe? How does it work?
It is a bit different, and I think this level of certification and regulation systems would be easier to get to go through under EU, for example. And I'm divided on this idea myself, because you see, I work for a software company. I get my salary from a software company, and as we all know, software companies are not liable for the bugs in their code. Every single end user license agreement, including ours, denies any responsibility for any damages our software happens to create on your system. That's the way it's always been. As a security and a privacy professionals, I think this is wrong. as someone who gets his paycheck from a software company, I mean, clearly we don't want to be like no software company has ever been liable for bugs in their code. Nobody wants to be the first. But if we start regulating the software on devices, then the next step might be software by itself. So this isn't an easy problem, and I really don't know what the outcome will be.
Is it any easier for IIoT? And the only reason I think it might be, if I were to answer that question, is maybe we have more money.
Yeah, that's what I was going to
Maybe.
say. The vendors can afford to invest more in security, and maybe the clients are listening more to discussions about security features than the home user who's buying a washing machine.
And I have seen some protocols and some efforts where these devices automatically update themselves, so they don't require any user action at all. And some protocols around not letting that update be hijacked, because I think even in the IIoT world, we're having such a bad record of patching and keeping up to date and doing cyber maintenance on servers and workstations and very expensive controllers. Now, if you imagine, the actual sensors, actuators, things like that out in the field where you have thousands of them, I don't see us succeeding in that if it's a manual action. Do
Yeah.
you think automated cyber maintenance is going to be required for IIoT, or do you think it's something we could put on the end user?
Well, automation is key to get security actually done. It has to be automatic. But it does come with its own problems. Of course, then you need connectivity. If you want to have automatic manageability and automatic updatability, they have to be networked, and that then of course means that you have a different set of problems to worry about. But I think the biggest problem in OT world or IIoT devices is the long life cycle. The fact that these devices are used typically for way longer than any consumer devices
Yeah.
or basically anything else. The other only exception I could think of might be cars, the cars we drive. I'm driving a 23-year-old car right now, and I'm very happy with it. That's an unusually long life cycle for a consumer device, and that starts to be the same life cycle we see in factories and OT devices.
Okay. Well, I really wanted to dig into that area because if it's smart, it's vulnerable. That really applies to a lot of these IIoT devices and other smart devices. I think you have a whole nother book in you on that topic,
Yeah.
because that's you're saying that's Hyppoten's law, right? Or
Hmm.
people are actually crediting you with that, and I think that's actually a really good phrase, even for those outside the security community. I mean,
Yeah.
that's something I could tell my parents. They could say, "Look, if they say it's a smart thing, you got to realize it could be hacked."
Right.
Now, do
Right.
you
Right.
care if your refrigerator is hacked? Maybe you really don't care that much if your
I
refrigerator
I
is hacked.
I'll accept the Hypponen law title for it, but I'm not entirely happy with the law because it is a very pessimistic law. Um, Grouping all smart devices under the same title and simply saying that when we add functionality and connectivity, things become hackable. It's really pessimistic. Unfortunately, it is also true. And the example I always use to illustrate what I mean is a smartwatch. Compare an old mechanical wristwatch, the kind of
Hmm.
watch you wind, and a modern smartwatch like Apple Watch. How do you hack a mechanical wristwatch? Well, you don't, because there's no functionality, there's no connectivity, there's no
Hmm.
CPUs, there's no memory, there's no nothing. How do you hack a smartwatch? Well, there's multitudes of ways of doing it. So when we add connectivity and functionality to things that were safe become unsafe. They do become vulnerable, and unfortunately, it seems to be true.
Well, let's try to hit two more quick things from the book. If it's smart, it's vulnerable. Hold up that book again. Do you have that book
Sure,
next to you?
I do. Here we go.
It's a very nice cover too. Yeah, I mean, you really had a good team working on this book. I was really impressed. And for some people, the Kindle version is very good too. I've sometimes get these technical books where the Kindle version isn't that great. But
Hmm.
another area I thought was interesting was on page 207. You talk about deterrence, And you say, what is the deterrent effect of cyber weapons? In fact, it is negligible. Our understanding of different countries' cyber warfare capabilities is very limited. Do you think that last sentence, that our limited understanding of cyber warfare capabilities, is why deterrence isn't working? Or do you think that deterrence in cyber weapons is just something that we're not going to see in the future?
The way you get deterrence out of any weapon is by making sure your enemy knows you have them and knows what they can do. This is the reason why we do military parades. This is the reason why countries with nuclear weapons do nuclear testing, to show that they have them. And how do you show a cyber weapon? How do you illustrate the power of a cyber weapon? Well, we could argue it could be done. You could invite your enemies and give them a show of the kind of zero-day exploits you have in your vaults. Except you can't do that. If you would show exactly how you would exploit your enemy's system, then they could do exactly the same thing. This doesn't apply to any other weapon. If you show a tank to your enemy, they don't have the tank now. If you show an exploit to your enemy, now they have the exploit. They can recreate the same thing. And this means the traditional way of creating deterrence simply doesn't work with cyber weapons. And this is made worse by the fact that cyber weapons have a shorter life cycle than any other weapons. Tanks or aircraft carriers or fighter jets work for decades. Exploits work for a year or two or three, and then they simply don't work anymore because systems change or the bugs are found and fixed. And that's a bad combination when you have expensive new weapons you create with very short life cycle, which give you no deterrence value at all, which is bringing us closer to a situation where the threshold of using the weapons, for example, for espionage purposes, becomes lower and lower to get some return on the investment.
Okay, now I'm going to ask you the question. I'm sure you've heard it before. I get it asked it all the time. Why then have we not seen more cyber incidents taking down critical infrastructure? There is no right answer here, but what's your guess on that?
Most of the attacks we see, most of the attacks in the headlines, most of the attacks that people are aware of are done by criminals who are looking for money. Criminals who look for money are not interested in those kind of systems. They are interested in the systems they know and understand, the systems they know are easily hackable and know they can turn into money. That's why we see Windows laptops getting hit by ransomware. That's the kind of target that the organized criminal gangs know and understand, and they know how to turn it into money. Why would they invest their time and money to target anything else as long as this works as well as it does? And then when we look at the attackers who are capable of targeting critical infrastructure in wide scale, then we're speaking about nation states. And nation states are not criminal gangs. Criminal gangs attack every day in and out. Nation states do targeted attacks. They only do them when needed. And most of the attacks done by nation states are not about sabotage. It's about espionage. And espionage you're not supposed to detect ever. So they don't make the headlines. We don't see the news when nation states use high-level attacks against their enemies. The rare examples or exceptions we know of then happen during times of real conflict. Of course, Ukraine right now would be an example of that happening.
I wonder then, because I have to believe that China and Russia and the U.S. each have some level of knowledge of what the other may be capable of. Maybe not a certainty, but they have some view what they're capable of. Maybe it is just that criminal versus state activity. You could have deterrence and it not be cyber deterrence, right? If someone were to sabotage a large power plant in the United States, there would be a certain deterrent that would make them hesitant to do that because the U.S. would likely hit back, whether it was cyber or not. So perhaps the cyber deterrent isn't something we should even look at separately. But then again, we do see tit for tats. We do see you hit me this way, I'll hit you back the same proportional way, or maybe a little bit more. So I guess to put this in a question, do you see cyber deterrence becoming a thing in the next 10 years, or do you think it's just something that, due to what you said before, just we're not going to see?
I don't see how it would really change. If you have a weapon that you can't show, because showing the weapon gives the weapon to your enemy, you're never going to get deterrence with that. You might like have, I don't know, double blind war games where you show the effects of your cyber attacks, but nobody's going to really believe that unless you really show what you're doing. So it would otherwise be just make believe. So I
Okay.
don't really know how that's going to change. And the thing about retaliating cyber attacks, tit for tat, or as even Obama already said that U.S. reserves the right to retaliate with kinetic warfare, basically saying that we'll return with missiles if you launch a denial of service attack against critical infrastructure. That's also unlikely to happen in the real world, simply because false flag attacks or making your attacks look like it's your enemy instead of you. If I want to attack USA, I would just reroute my attacks through Canada and then wait for missiles to hit Vancouver. I mean, I don't think that's going to happen. So as long as attribution is as hard as it is in cyber, retaliation probably is just talk.
And just as an example, false flags is another thing, that one of the many things you cover in the book. If it's smart, it's vulnerable. So it really does give people a very broad view of what, offense and defense is going on in the cybersecurity world, and policy and regulation. Very, very complete book. I really got to take my hat off to you. One last thing before we run out of time here. You mentioned F-Secure Radar, which is your company's way that you're scanning the internet, essentially. And you talk about connected ICS devices in there and actually contacting them.
Sure.
When this is not something unique to F-Secure, Shodan's doing this, a variety of other scanners are doing it. Who should be? I mean, I thought it was very nice that your company actually went to the trouble to contact these people. That's a lot of work. We've tried to do that before. It's not so easy to find them and contact them. Who, if anyone, should be doing that contacting? I mean, is that something government should do? Is that something buyer beware? You take care of yourself?
Well, clearly, us, the finders, contacting the end users or the companies or the enterprises isn't working, as the example in the book illustrates. People have hard time believing who you are and why you're calling them and how the hell did you find our system and are you some kind of a hacker. And certainly our critical systems are not on the public internet. You must be lying. So maybe it should be the government. I'm certain they would face the same kind of problem, like, are you really the government? Why are you contacting me? And all kind of conspiracy theories around that as well. So leaving users or corporate users to try to figure out these by themselves isn't going to work either. I'm not really certain if we have a good answer for this question at all. Things are going online. Everything is going online. Every company is becoming a software company. And I don't think we have the visibility within these companies to know what they are really exposing to the public internet, and makes them more vulnerable for attacks.
I had CISA director Jen Easterly on stage with me this year at S4.
She's great.
And she is great. I think she really, her and the team have done a great job on I'd say the awareness and brand effort. But one of the things I pushed her on is how are you going to measure if you succeed in the ICS world? What are the metrics? Because it's great that we create all these nice tools and things for people to see, but how do we know if we're succeeding or not? Do you think the measurement of internet connected ICS for a country is a good metric? Because you could do that with F-Secure, right? You could,
sure,
or F-Secure Radar, you could do that. Shodan could do that. They could say we had this many this year. A quarter later, we have fewer or more. Is that a worthwhile metric?
To some limit, yes, but in the end, you might simply end up measuring which country happens to have the largest honey nets in their IP space instead of real machines, because we see those a lot as well. When we find like really vulnerable systems online and it looks really bad, we always double check, is this actually a honeynet, because this looks too bad. Sometimes they are honeynets or honeypots, sometimes they're not. So um, metrics are important. We don't know what's happening unless we measure it, and that's tightly connected to visibility. One of the themes I repeat in the book as well is visibility. Most companies, organizations, enterprises, and factories, the thing where they keep failing the most is not really knowing what they have. What are they actually running? Where is it? Which parts of that are visible to outsiders? What cloud systems do they have? How many workstations do we have? Where are they right now? Once you know what you have, once you know what normal looks like, then you can start looking for abnormal things.
Is there anything else from your book, If It's Secure, It's Vulnerable, that you want to highlight for the reader, or anything else you might want to tell to this audience about the book?
Well, one thing I want to mention here is that many people have been asking me for an audiobook, and many people have been asking if I'm reading the audiobook by myself. The audiobook isn't out yet, but it's coming. There will be an official Audible audiobook in a couple of weeks from now, and so that's probably going to be in September. And it's not going to be read by me. We actually did a trial run. I read a chapter from the book, and the publisher and the audio specialist listened to it, and they told me that, Mikko, your English is fluent. We like your accent, but nobody's going to listen to this for 8 hours. So we're going to have a professional read it.
I actually think you could have pulled it off. I don't know, but I'll have to see who you get. I do know that I'd encourage people to read it. I know they will enjoy it. I mean, it was a very easy read, very entertaining read, and I did learn something, especially in the historical section.
Right.
I
Well,
learned something.
that's great to hear from you, Dale. If you learned something from the book, I'm happy.
And then also to get your point of view on the future section. We really didn't cover much of the future, and I would say it's probably the smallest part of the book. I think you cover the past and the present the most. But the other thing I'm going to tell you is that closer to Christmas, I'm also going to recommend this on my annual giving list, because I think this is really a book. If you're getting so many questions from your friends and family as to what you do, how does it work, how does this work, you can hand them this book and it might save you a lot and they might understand you better. So really nice job on the book, and I appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you, Dale. Thanks for having me.